KU has reportedly shown interest in Jarvis Moss, a transfer guard from Radford, before that from Stanford. How would he fit in with KU? We deep dive into this transfer portal target.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're breaking down another transfer portal target with Jarvis Moss, as we've kind of gone through some of these different guards that could possibly fill in for that Diggy Coit role on last year's team. For this year's Kansas team, Jarvis Moss becomes another one that Kansas has reportedly shown interest in the same way that we talked about John Buggs on a recent episode. Samage Teel as well. Check out those episodes if you're an everydayer. Thank you if you already did. So we'll get into the scouting report fit with KU and some of the latest news as well going on with KU basketball and KU athletics. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's at FanDuel.com. So Jarvis Moss, well, let's start here. Why are we talking about him? This is according to the Portal Report, which is a popular social media account that a lot of different transfers, reach out to, DM with, and they help compile graphics lists. It's similar to like a Tipped in Edits, right? They reported a couple weeks ago that Jarvis Moss has received interest from, and there's a long list of schools: Ohio State, St. John's, Virginia Tech, South Carolina, Kansas, and the list goes on and on and on with some of the schools that are interested there. And again, I should just record a disclaimer that we talk about this all the time, that how accurate is it that this school is on the list and that school is on the list? I don't know. But Moss started his career at Stanford, which tells you that this is somebody who at one point or another, at one point in time, or I guess at least from a physical standpoint, was good enough to be at a Power 5 school. And that, can be important as you're talking about the translation up. Now, he didn't have a ton of success at Stanford, so does that tell you that he can't cut it, or was it just he was there when he was younger and now he's a better player because he's gotten older, and players get better when they get older? But Moss was started at Stanford, then he goes to Davidson. Again, doesn't play much at Davidson either, and then he transfers down again in league to Radford, where he has a breakout season this past season for Radford. He's a 6'4", 200-pound shooting guard, so he's got pretty good size for a shooting guard at the collegiate level. He'll be a redshirt senior this upcoming season for whatever school he attends. Averaged 13.5 points per game at Radford, 2.5 rebounds, 1.9 assists, 1 steal, and 0 blocks per game. Shot just a hair under 42% from the floor, which is a little lower than you like to see there, but the three-point percentage is good, 37.6% on three-point shots this past season at Radford. That's a solid number there. And he did it on very high volume, 6.5 attempts per game from three-point range. Also a very good free throw shooter, 84.2% at the free throw line, and did that taking just about 3 free throw attempts per game. Overall, the effective field goal percentage at 53, the true shooting percentage at 57.5. Both of those are good. And the on-off numbers were fantastic for Jarvis Moss at Radford. Overall, per 100 possessions, Radford was over 8 points better on the offensive end of the floor when he was out there. They were almost 9 points better on the defensive end of the floor per 100 when he was out there. So total it up, the team was basically 17 points per 100 possessions better overall when he was out on the floor. So a very impactful player for Radford this past season. We get into his strengths, we get into the questions about his game, and I think one of the strengths has to be shooting. And as Kansas is looking to kind of fill this role, as we've talked about with those other guards, with John Buggs, I think Buggs, the best three-point shooter. If you're comparing Teel, Moss, and Buggs, I think Moss would probably be second among the three-point shooters. Teel would be third. Teal's a better driver than probably both of those guys, right? I mean, the defense, maybe that would be in Moss's favor. We'll get into that in a second here. But the shooting still is a strength for Jarvis Moss. 81st percentile in free throw shooting. Again, shooting almost 85% at the free throw line. So very good free throw shooting numbers there. 79th percentile three-point attempt rate. So he's getting them up at a high volume, and he is in a situation where if you're shooting more threes, it's going to be more difficult to make them at a high clip because Just the more you take, the more the defense is going to focus on you. 33.5% on above the break threes, so that's slightly above average nationally there. He was elite from the corner, though, 48.4% from the sides. And I think that's important because when you look at Bill Self's offense and when you look at, for instance, a lot of the spot-up threes that maybe A.J. Storr ended up taking for this past team, or a lot of the spot-up threes that Nick Timberlake was given an opportunity for, or that Isaiah Moss got when he was at Kansas. They're corner threes, and they're threes that are right at that edge of the kind of wing corner area. And if you're looking at best three-point shooters for that, for somebody who's just going to play a role of coming in and being a spot-up corner three-point shooter, they have to be able to make them from the corner. And Moss did that at a high rate, 48.4% from the sides this past season. He also shot 37.7%, so basically 38%, on three balls of 25 or more feet. Again, that's how CBB Analytics defines deep threes. So on deep threes, he was almost 38%. That's very good. That's 74th percentile nationally on 2 deep tries per game. We mentioned on yesterday's episode, again, thank you, Everydayers, if you already caught it, talking with John Buggs III, who I think is the best, shooting player available, I guess, in the portal at this point for Kansas. But Ochai Agbaji shot 40% on 2 deep threes per game his final season at Kansas. So with Moss, 38% on 2 deep threes per game this past season. Obviously, worse competition with Radford, but still. Overall, 74th percentile true shooting percentage for Jarvis Moss. So efficient player, efficient scorer. Not a ton of volume at the rim either, but I should say this is another strength of his game. I guess you would view it as, I don't know if you view it as like he's good at cutting or he's good at picking and choosing his spots or using the gravity that his three-point shooting provides to get easy twos, but he shot 71% at the rim. It's lower volume, 1.5 attempts per game, but what that tells me is that he was very good at, again, either cutting to the rim, getting wide open layups, or having teams, if you're going to face guard me, if you're going to get up in my grill on the offensive end, I'm going to back cut you and get a wide open layup because of it. And having that instinct, having that ability, I think is a good counter for what you provide if you are a shooter. You want to have one extra element to make it a little tougher to guard you. He also had low turnover numbers, 71st percentile turnover rate, so you don't have to worry about him being a turnover problem because if he's not going to be the star of the team, you don't want him being a source of turnovers, right? He can also score in fast break, 72nd percentile in fast break points per 40 minutes. And he had solid size too, right? I mean, as we go up and down the KU lineup, they don't have many Diggy Coits. They don't have many 5'8", 5'9", 5'10 guys. They don't have them, right? So Jarvis Moss would continue having, positional size if you're KU. He'd be one of the shorter guys on the team, actually, at 6'4", but that's a good place to be if the shorter guys on your team are 6'4". Now, I will put this one before I get to the questions. This is kind of in the middle here. Not exactly sure what to think. What is his level of defense? I think he's better than, again, we had the deep dives on Buggs and Teal, and thank you if you already caught him. If you haven't, go back and check him out. I think he's better on defense than both of those guys, but I still don't know that I view him as like a plus defender either. 30th percentile Hakeem rate, 63rd percentile defensive RAPM, so that's above average there. 27th percentile defensive win shares, and then 90th percentile on-off D rating. So that's actually interesting because you go back and forth. The Hakeem rate, the ability to get blocks and steals, is not that good. The defensive RAPM, solid. The defensive win shares, not very good. The on-off D rating, very good, right? So you go back and forth with all of these things. You have this idea of he's a 6'4" guard playing at Radford when he started his career at Stanford. Maybe he's just bigger than those guys and able to be a good defender. I don't know what to think of him on the defensive end, to be completely honest, but I do feel better about him on the defensive end than Buggs and Teal. So if you're talking about who's the best shooter of the month, like I said earlier, I'm taking Buggs, but if you're talking who's the best defender, I'm taking Moss. And Moss also has the best size of the three. Now, again, Teal is the best driver and maybe the best ball handler of the three, so it kind of depends what you're going for among these three. Now, what are the questions here? Moss is not somebody who provides anything rebounding the basketball. But again, in this specific role, I don't know that that's that important anyway. Also, the other big question here that I do have is the jump in competition. And that's something that does apply for, Samage, Teal, and Buggs as well, that they would be making a sizable jump in competition. But I bring it up even more so with Jarvis Moss because there's a sample where it hasn't always looked so good. So he played just 34 combined games in his 2 years at Stanford, plus 1 at Davidson. So that's 3 seasons of being either in the Atlantic 10 or the Pac-12 and only playing 34 combined games. Is part of that, was he injured at some point? I don't entirely know, but it came in low minutes, which kind of suggests he was never really part of the rotation at those bigger schools. His true shooting percentage was 8 percentage points lower in the 7 games he played against KenPom top 100 teams than it was for the full season. And the 3-point percentage fell from what was around 37% to, in those games against KenPom top 100 teams, to 33%. So you're talking a sizable jump there. Is that something where, again, 7 games is still a relatively small sample size? It also, as I've said before, like if you're the top option or one of the top options on a bad team and you go to a good team, you're not getting defended by the best player on a better team now. So maybe that actually helps you in some way. So it's kind of the question of like, did he have his best season statistically and just overall? Did he have his best season because he dropped in competition and he found a level of competition where he was able to play to where if you move him back up in competition, it ain't going to work? Or did he have his best season because he just happened to, guys, as I said earlier, guys, as they get older, get better at basketball. And guys, the longer they stay in college, they're going to improve at things and they're going to get better at basketball. And so did he just happen to find his breakout season and find the recipe for success that he needs while also being at a lower level to where even if he does jump up in level, he found what he needs to be more successful once he goes back up to that level? That kind of is the question that you'd be answering by trying to bring him aboard. So how exactly would he fit in with the team plus the latest news? We get to all that and more next with Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action than with FanDuel. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. Player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. It's also PGA Championship time this week, and if you want to get KU's own Gary Woodland, you can get in on him on a top 10 bet, on a top 20 bet. You can get on him to be in the first round top 10, so just after one day, if you just want to be like, hey, short bet on Thursday, you can get that at double-digit odds, 10-1, for Gary to be in the top 10 after Thursday. And if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on Locked On Jayhawks, making us your first listen every day. Thank you to every dayers catching each and every episode of the show. Don't forget you can make Locked On College Basketball or Locked On College Football your second listen, third listen if you're listening to both of them every day. Okay, how exactly would Jarvis Moss fit in with KU? So what he would add to the team, I mean, obviously, as we've been talking about with all these guys, if you're looking to add another kind of bench guard, somebody to fill that Diggy Coit, Jalen Coleman-Lands role, you want them to add shooting to the team. And that is one of the questions we have for this Kansas team. Do they have enough shooting? And can you get a little bit more? And so Jarvis Moss fits that billing. He would add more shooting to the team. So it makes sense that Kansas has shown some sort of interest in him, right? I think maybe this is overreading into the fact that he was at Stanford, but he seems to be a smart player. And it's not just the fact that he was at Stanford for 2 years. I mean, honestly, that should be enough to be like, okay, you're probably pretty smart. But I see a smart level of basketball. You're a player who has low turnover numbers. You're a player who cuts well off ball. You're a player who can take the open shot at the rim or shoot a three. Seems to be a smart or just common sense level player on the basketball court. And that is a good thing for anybody's game, especially if you're trying to fit onto a team. Every team is going to accept players who can fit in and have that right kind of mentality and are smart players, right? You're going to find your way on the floor and you're going to stay on the floor if you're not making boneheaded plays. I think continued size, he would continue adding with the team, as I said earlier. He'd be one of the shorter guys on the team, but that would be a plus. Again, if we compare it to the Diggy Coit role, Diggy Coit, 5'7", 5'8", 5'9", that's a big difference between having a 6'4" guy playing that specific role. What he wouldn't add to the team, I mean, he doesn't give KU more rebounding. It wouldn't give KU, obviously, another star, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, recruiting for a role player. It wouldn't add a ton more defense or high athleticism to the team necessarily. I don't think it'd be like a negative, but again, those are all things that KU has done so well in recruiting to this point that you kind of need to zag to the zig, so to speak. Like, you need more three-point shooting to balance all of that other athleticism and length and defense that you kind of have already on the roster. So, yeah, as far as how he'd fit into the team, I think it is that Diggy Coit, Jalen Coleman-Lands role, right? It's the guy who is the eighth or ninth man, is shooting three-point shots. If they're going in, he's going to play more. If they're not, he's not going to play as much that specific game, and that's kind of the idea there. And, you could play him at the 2 or the 3 if you needed to, right? If you wanted to play a bit of a smaller lineup. I say smaller where Darren Peterson is the point guard because he's big for a point guard, but where you had like Darren Peterson and Marco Jackson or Melvin Council, and then you had him at the 3, and you could kind of rotate him and Jaden Dawson as being your shooter on the outside, or you could maybe even play lineups where they're together, one's at 2 and one's at 3. Just gives you more options and another player who could kind of hit threes off the bench, and another option at like, what if Jaden Dawson's having a bad three-point shooting game? Who else do you turn to if you're Kansas to be like, okay, can you make some threes for us? Like, maybe it's Darren Peterson, but you're already asking so much of Darren Peterson that it's like, do you want him to have to be your best three-point shooter and your best at all of these other things? And maybe he's just so good that he will be naturally, but like, you need more guys than one that you can rely on being good three-point shooters. Because right now, there are certain guys where it's like, okay, Trey White's going to be at least a proficient enough three-point shooter, but it's going to be on low volume. You need enough guys who can come in and shoot 35, 36, 37% from 3 on, a handful of attempts per game, and he would kind of fit in with that with Jarvis Moss. Now, if we are comparing to those other guys we talked about earlier this week with Samage, Teel, and John Buggs, I think Buggs is still my favorite, even though Moss gives you, I think, maybe even more defense than Buggs. I just love the fact that Buggs is so elite at the shooting that would be such a strong skill for KU to add, specifically for what they need. So I think I'd go Buggs as the top. I think I'd go Moss as second, even though Teel, I think, like, you could argue Teel is a better player in a vacuum than Moss. If we're just talking fit, I think Moss fits the 3 and D a little bit more than Teel, if that kind of makes sense. But honestly, I'd be fine with any of those 3 in that specific role, and I think all of them could excel at it to what you would need them to do and fitting in with the team. But, it just kind of depends what you want to do. All right, let's finish up. Latest news, some interesting NBA draft combine measurements, and a little KU women's basketball talk. Thanks for joining us here on Locked On Jayhawks, and thanks for making us your first listen every day. So, NBA Combine is currently going on. I believe it ends on May 18th, which would be, I think, Saturday or Sunday of this week. So that'll probably give us a better idea about some of the players that are still in the portal, whether it's Darrion Williams, RJ Lewis, Jamir Watkins. Those are kind of the main ones for KU. That, are they going to come back to college? What school are they going to pick to transfer to if they do come back to college? It won't be fully complete because the deadline for them officially having to make that decision isn't for a couple weeks. It's like at the end of May. I think it's May 28th. But they'll have a much better idea after that. There's so many NBA teams there. How are you going to test? How are you going to measure? How are you going to play if you're playing in the scrimmages? That they'll have a much better idea of what they should do. Where are you being expected in the draft? Do you have any promises, right? How does that relate to what area you could get picked, how much money you would get versus how much money you would get in NIL to come back to school? So I think we're going to start to get maybe a more clear picture on the roster in about a week. At least that's the hope here. Maybe it'll be even sooner than that, right? But certainly by the end of May, you would think that would be the case. So as far as some of those players, Jamir Watkins, as we mentioned, he didn't measure. He measured at last year's Combine, and we went over some of his measurements in his deep dive, which thank you if you already caught that one here. If you haven't, check it out. Talking Jamir Watkins here with Locked On Jayhawks. RJ Lewis measured, and he measured pretty good, almost 6'6" without shoes, 6'5" 3/4. So, I mean, with shoes, you're talking about him being a legit, 6'7", 210 pounds. He had a 6'10" 3/4 wingspan, so almost a 6'11" wingspan for Lewis, and an 8'7.5" standing reach. So Lewis measured very well in those areas. Darrion Williams, on the other hand, did not measure very well at all. 6'4.5" without shoes, and he's somebody who, if he's going to be playing the 4, which he can in college, 6'4.5" without shoes, that puts you closer to 6'6" with shoes, 236 pounds, only a 6'6" wingspan. in the NBA, you'd have to play the 3, and that would still be a small 3. But I don't know that he's quick enough or fast enough to play the 3. Now, then again, in today's version of the NBA, we have seen smaller be able to get away with things more easily because of versatility and if you can switch and stuff like that. But point being, I looked at the 6'6" wingspan for Williams would literally be the worst wingspan among any active NBA 3 or 4-man, small forward or power forward, would literally be the worst. So I don't know. He was being projected in kind of the early to mid second round. I think that's going to ding him a little bit in a very real way. He also has just an 8'5" standing reach. Now we know he can be productive at the collegiate level. I wouldn't bet against him in the NBA and everything that he's been able to accomplish and stuff. But point being, you do wonder if that propels him to go back to school in a real way, right? And out of comparison, like we've talked about, Dame Sarr and the length is kind of so much better for him. It's even a little bit better than RJ Lewis, but a lot better than Darrion Williams. Now, Williams obviously has another level of feel, another level of offensive game, and proven production in college than, say, Dame Sarr has. But I do find that interesting what he measured in as. Again, was still good enough to be effective at the collegiate level. So I wouldn't worry about the measurements in terms of from a Kansas perspective, but it does make you wonder if it sends him back to college for another year. Other news around some of the other sports, KU baseball is sitting at 39-14, 17-10 in Big 12 play. We mentioned this on a previous episode, but just wanted to reiterate, they're playing West Virginia. If they can sweep West Virginia, but it's on the road, West Virginia's first in the Big 12, they could have a chance to win the Big 12 in the regular season, depending on what Arizona State does. But regardless, they're just looking to, maybe grab a win or two on the road here, at the very least, at West Virginia. That'll start Thursday at 5:30, Friday at 5:30, and then Saturday at noon, all of those times, Central Time, and then it'll be the Big 12 Championship for the Big 12 Tournament after that. Also for KU women's basketball, ESPN released their top 10 recruiting class rankings for NCAA women's basketball. You got LSU, Tennessee, Stanford, South Carolina, North Carolina, UConn. Those are the top 6 teams you're accustomed to seeing there. Number 7 is Kansas, and actually number 8 is Kansas State. So I guess the in-state basketball must be doing pretty darn good in the state of Kansas and I guess in the surrounding areas in Kansas City and stuff like that for women's basketball. Maybe not talked about enough how good that has been here in the local area. But Kansas coming in at number 7, that makes them the number 1 Big 12 team. It'll be a very pivotal year. Samaya Nichols coming into her junior season. You got a really good recruiting class coming in. How ready are they going to be right away? How much can you fill out the roster around them? And can you make it back to the tournament this year? I think that is a very fair expectation. Can you make it back to the NCAA tournament this year and then feel like you've got this crop of young players with, if you make it to the tournament this year, then the following season, you'd have a senior year Samaya Nichols with all of those young, talented players becoming sophomores. And then you could be like, that could be a really fun season if you can do just that. But that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.